them to this field or something that you feel is happening in your work or with young people today and through your role that you think would be particularly helpful for folks here to understand, to give us some perspective on how you may contribute to this evening's discussion. And would you like to start us off, Brenda? Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. So I work over at the middle school and the high school, so that's the population, the age range of students that I work with here in the Ossining community. Social work has been, it's my second career actually. I was in the corporate world and there was just so much I wanted to do and make different, and I changed my career into social work. And listening and seeing this movie again, and I hear about where they're referencing a safe place for students and students to be able to express themselves, and that's something that really struck me because it's I think the one thing that I come across a lot with students is being able to give them that safe place that they can open up and express themselves, and how many of our students are just experiencing traumatic things since childhood currently, and being able to give them that safe space and being able to give them that opportunity to express themselves has been so key in the work that I'm doing and the work that we're doing in the district. One of the things I always strongly encourage is students to connect to an adult in the building, whoever it may be. And it's one thing that I feel that once they feel connected to an adult, it's so supportive for them. They feel it is someone they can go to, it is a safe place for them. And it just really, it's one of the things that really stands out for me with this movie and what is happening here in our community.
Thank you. Who wants to be next?
Good evening. Back in the day, I was a special education teacher working with kids who had the educational label of emotionally disturbed. There's also a psychiatric label applied. In my classroom of 10 to 11 kids, most had the psychiatric diagnosis of conduct disorder. The diagnostic criteria is that they are aggressive, manipulative, victimize others without empathy, and are involved in youth crime. Invariably, my kids had multiple ACEs in their life, and their behavior reflected that they are products, perhaps victims, of the lives that they've been born into. I was fortunate to have been trained in approaches that work on building relationships with kids. I also studied these mathematical, scientific behavior management techniques that can reduce behavior. But these kids who show these outward behaviors are actually doing something about their mental state, as dysfunctional as it is. And so yes, I know the techniques that could crush their behavior and make it go away, but that just adds more to the problems that are inside. And the only way to reach inside to these youngsters is to build positive interpersonal trust bonds with them. So I pass that along to my students, graduate program, training teachers coming back for their degree in master's degree in special ed, with a focus on kids who have emotional and behavioral troubles and mental health concerns. They also experience trauma, something called secondary trauma syndrome. You find it a lot in the helping professions, in first responders, and teachers who work with troubled and troubling kids. That there's the old saying that if you don't heal your own wound, that knife will cut others. And my teachers are suffering from trauma, and so we also deal with that in multiple ways.
I'm already inspired. Yeah, so I've been involved in community mental health pretty much my whole career. From the very beginning, doing homeless outreach, working with adults, working on inpatient units. I worked at a city hospital, ran a child psychiatric ER. And I've always, I think, what I've seen in my travels is that there are just amazing people out there doing trauma-informed work. And this, I think this view of things really helps bring a lot of that into sense. So what I see, I guess really it hit me when I was working in the emergency room, because Friday afternoons we'd see the caravan of ambulances come, often from schools, 911 calls, and it would be children, often children of colors, males of color, pre-adolescent males of color, and they'd come in with so-called diagnoses of things like disruptive behavior disorders, conduct disorders, all of these sort of, in the psychiatric field, there are a lot of DSM diagnoses, and this is just my opinion, but a lot of people share this, that aren't, they're not really scientifically that reliable. And I see that kids there's a tendency to pathologize children by imposing a disease model from the adult system onto kids. And it's not necessarily a helpful lens. So what I like to look at in terms of being trauma-informed is the idea, like all of us have been seeing in the movie and just right now, the importance of relationships. We can't escape adversity. That's part of life. Bad things happen to all of us. But if we have somebody who's there, who can listen to you, I like to think of trauma as an absence of resilience. And I think this is a nice lens to look at things through, because it can help us understand that it's actually the fact that there's no interactive repair, there's nobody there that makes adversity traumatic. And so if we look at things through an absence of resilience, an absence of connectedness and safety and self-regulation, then that lets us understand things in a whole different light. And we can look at things in terms of, it doesn't have to be a mental health intervention or a school intervention or a juvenile justice intervention or a child welfare intervention. Anything any of us can do to help create a sense of safety and connectedness and self-regulation is going to be therapeutic, and that's going to be healing. And it doesn't have to just stop with having the absence of symptoms. It can help make our lives better, and it's involved in growth and enlightenment and getting a sense of meaning and spirituality. Communities can do this. So I just love that this is a very embracing way of looking at things. So I've kind of rambled, but...
well, thank you. You've provided us with a good starting point, and folks are just now starting to receive a copy of the questions. What's their ACEs score? And we do also have versions in Spanish, so if anyone would prefer a Spanish language one, just quietly raise your hand and we will bring that over to you. And I have a couple more in my zone here to hand out. And we have something up on the screen that identifies the website for us to go to if you have a cell phone and you're able to participate in that way. That's how we will, right here, right now, be able to get a sense of the experiences of our audience. So, has anybody tried to open it on their phone yet? Or are you all taking a look at what your own score might be?
And you just have to put a number between 0 and 10. Just one number. And this will hopefully be in percentages.
So it'll take a moment for us to read through these 10 questions. Anytime our answer is yes, we get a point. And then we go to this website, www.menti.com, and it'll be self-explanatory from there.
You enter in the 6-digit code, and that will bring you to our survey.
Ah, all right, let's see.
You see it in the upper right, 794786.
Thank you, Tom. So I got in, I was able to put the score in, and I'm falling behind. Other people are way faster than me. I have no idea what my score is yet. How's everybody doing? We still need a couple of minutes. Am I the only one who's slow? More people? Okay. Yes, the library Wi-Fi should pop up on your screen and ask you to agree when you try to go online. Or if you hit Safari or whatever your search engine is.
For a password.
The library one shouldn't, but the Menti one password is up there.
And if anyone doesn't have a cell phone, if you want to just enter, you can borrow mine to enter it in if you want. Sometimes
It's got your credit card information too, right?
can't use my credit card.
I'm going to ask the panelists to follow the same rules as the audience, which is please use the microphone as your talking stick. Thank you. That way everyone can hear us and only one of us is going to talk at once, at least in each microphone. So does that mean we now have 20 people who have voted?
Yeah.
Okay. That's a good portion of the room. I still see some folks looking on their phones, so I'll hold off for a few more moments. People can start thinking of what they want to ask to kick off our discussion. Sure. Yes, so who was somebody, did you have a question already? Here we go.
Just get a sign into the library with internet.
Oh, cell. It's got nothing to do with the setting.
What?
I've got one cell and multiple open. Yeah.
Well,
While we're,
Victoria, did you get in?
yeah, I got in.
So I'm going to use your phone.
I don't know if it'll let you do another one, because I've already submitted. Does it let you do more than one? You'll get one per phone.
Phone? It says over there. Well, I have to go out forward to do it.
so
While we're figuring out a little technology, a number of, well, 27 people have been able to figure it out. So I have, let's have our first audience question.
I have a question that I didn't hear answered in the film, or maybe I missed it. My work, I started doing social work at Temple, and we talked a lot about generational trauma and the long-term impacts of that. So I guess I can say this. My score was 8. But I calculated my daughter's quickly, and I think it would be a 2. But her mental health impacts appear as if she's living through an 8. I just wanted to... Yeah.
It's a little weird for me to talk in this thing because I'm so loud.
You're not
But, okay, so, I mean, the ACEs study, first of all, it's important to know that there are more than 10 adverse childhood experiences in life. These are just the 10 questions that were standardized for epidemiological purposes. So these 10 are often used, but people are starting to use additional ACEs as well. Things like racism, community stressors, community violence, things like that. Secondly, the ACEs research is epidemiological, so it shows these really important correlations over a large number of people at a population level. And when you boil it down to just one person, there's all sorts of variabilities. So it doesn't mean that if you as an individual have a certain ACE score, you're definitely going to have more or less of other effects of that. So that would be the first thing I would think of. And then another thing about ACEs is it's, I think it's mediated and moderated by resilience. And it sounds like for your child that you've provided a lot of opportunities for resilience and things like that as well. So it's really complicated. And if a single experience doesn't fit the pattern, it shows that there's just lots of variability and a lot of things that can play into that.
I was more wondering about DNA or some genetic or generational.
Yes, as Andy was mentioning, we may be underestimating the number of ACEs. A study out of Philadelphia listed 22 rather than 10. And also, right now, everyone is given the same amount of evidence. Each one is 1, where perhaps each one ought to be rated on a 1 to 10 scale. But getting to your latest question about the DNA, I just called up an article today as I'm preparing to train the trainers who will teach teachers in Queens and the Bronx. And I only got a chance to read the abstract. I haven't gotten into it yet, but the abstract said that trauma in previous generations can change the DNA, and that anxiety can actually be passed down through the generations. But again, while that may place the progeny, the children, at a little increased risk, so much of it, as Andy was saying, is resilience, what we're born with, but also resilience comes from supportive people around you, a community. Our greatest human psychological need is to belong, to be able to go to this person and just collapse and share and know that person will treat you well and will care for you. And that is the greatest resilience builder. And I think your daughter is fortunate to have someone like yourself who understands this and can provide that caring.
Thank you. Who else would like to ask a question of our panel? Or why don't we take a moment and can you give us some context for the results? We have 36 folks who have weighed in. We probably won't get too many more. How do these numbers compare to some of the national average or other groups that you've worked with?
So, I feel like John Kane here and the election results. So it's just to remember that the election is coming up and we all should vote.
Please,
okay.
19 days.
So, the epidemiological CDC study, 0 ACEs was 36%. 1 ACE was 24%. So we're lower than that in this room. 2 ACEs is 16%. We're about the same. 3 ACEs was 10%. Oh, now the room's getting a little higher. 4 ACEs ranges from 13 to 16% on the national average. So we're about double what the national average would show. And what's interesting, we've shown this film to all these different audiences. Judges, pre-sentencing investigators, probation officers, social workers, therapists, educators, early childhood specialists. And invariably, actually this is very common. This is about what we usually see. And to me, what this suggests is that, okay, people who are interested in this kind of stuff, maybe they had some more adversity than the national average. But it also suggests that maybe we've also come out the other end, and that we've had good experiences and we've worked through things. We've had resilience in our lives. And to me, the hopeful message of that is that we do have a capacity having come through the other side to want to help other people. And there's a concept of post-traumatic growth, which suggests that if you have come through the other side, that it can increase one's capacity for empathy and joy, meaning, and depth of experience. So it's not good to have adversity, but it doesn't have to be doom and gloom.
Thank you. So, I would just tell you that at 8:30 there's going to be probably some really loud, annoying voice that's going to come on and interrupt us, and that clock's never right. I have no idea what time it actually is. And at 8:45 we have to wrap up our conversation. Nobody wants to be the first question. Thank you, Heather, for kicking us off. Everybody wants to be the last question, and that just doesn't happen. So now would be a good time for your question.
One of the ACEs that was not mentioned in the film, but is mentioned in some of the questionnaires, is issues with immigration. There are many children that go to bed and they are not sure if tomorrow the parent is going to be there. So my question is for us to think about how we can create resilient communities that will support this population with the stress, the toxic stress even of listening to the news. So that's one, not so much a question, but for reflection. And the question to the panelists is, do you know if this film is available in Spanish or with Spanish subtitles? Because a large number of this population would benefit from seeing this film and having this kind of discussion. And because of the language barrier, if this is not available, then what can we do to make it available?
Just a second, Alice, I'll give you a microphone so you can.
I'm actually so glad you asked that question. I think you were at the first showing, right?
Yes.
Here as well. And my AmeriCorps is your protege, and she's now working at Neighbors Link, right? So the question is, I appreciate what you said about the immigration stresses. And the reason that we brought this movie to this community, actually the first time we showed it was May 9th at exactly this spot, is that we want to create a trauma-informed community. So what does that mean? You know, so you saw the movie, now what? We now, as a community, need to look at ourselves and look at all the various sectors. I'm so honored that Maureen Buzang's Hills here seeing it for like the third time, right, from the schools. You know, we've got a school social worker, we've got somebody from the the county department of mental health. You know, we've got to get faith-based leaders, people from law enforcement. We actually had the lieutenant of the police see it when we showed it in May. And what we need now is to lead conversations within our groups on how we can become more sensitive within our smaller communities and more aware of it, and how we can buffer trauma and build resilience. Because as Dr. Sankoff said from Harvard, I've seen the movie not quite as many times as you, Andy, but maybe 20. You've seen it about 40. He says the one thing that he wants people to believe, to understand, is that the brain is plastic and it's resilient. And we can help heal the brain. And that's what the proverbial village is for, right? But it's not just the schools. It's helping parents, being in faith-based organizations, having law enforcement approach people in very sensitive ways, which I think we do a lot of training in our department. Building up infrastructure like Neighbors Link. I see Dave back there, and you know, he, for the past 4 years, has labored to bring Neighbors Link into our community. It's an incredible support to our immigrant population. But I also want to say that ACEs are not only about people in poverty, right? ACEs affect everybody.
Yeah.
But they disproportionately affect people in poverty as well. So everybody in the community can benefit from learning about trauma-informed care and how to grow and become a more empathetic community on so many levels.
Is it available in Spanish?
Yes, it is. Actually, it's subtitled, And actually, usually when we show it with the subtitles so that people can see that it's subtitled.
Thank you.
I'd like to just add a second of information on the website called Community Conversations. Conversations.westchesterlibraries.org, sorry. It's a site that has a lot of information about resilience that we've been sharing over the course of these screenings all year. But we've just posted about a dozen documents in Spanish that are the ACEs questionnaire in Spanish, explanations for the impacts on children, guidance for parents. So not only are the subtitles are there, but there are supportive materials, and we are looking for partners to be able to get this out into the Spanish communities and to be sensitive to the types of issues that you just talked about.
And you've probably already created more than 100 showings since then.
Oh, okay. Well, I think it sounds like we have the makings for a next step in our community reach,
Right.
specifically to Spanish-speaking community. With all that you've just heard, would our panelists like to comment either on, you mentioned, Andrew, that the list is much longer than 10, and that sometimes people do talk about what are the community stresses and what are the societal stresses that could also have an impact on your ACEs score. Is there anything that you would like to comment on, any of you that we've just heard, please?
Sorry.
The microphone's telling everybody something. I don't want to be a total hog of the mic, but yeah, I get so excited about this stuff. Yeah, so ACEs does pervade across demographics, incomes and socioeconomic statuses and things like that. And there are certain ACEs where the prevalence differs depending on what group, and it can be more. But interestingly, the impact of ACEs on different communities is pretty much the same, but slightly different. And it makes me think that there are certain oppressed communities that actually may be less affected by certain ACEs, because that community has developed strategies of resilience that I think all the rest of us can learn from. And that's something I would love to explore further.
Interesting.
And then in terms of action, I'm sorry. I'm going to say this. I read this thing a really interesting article about what's called the Community Loss Index. And Hunter College has developed a scale that shows that whole communities can have ACEs as well. And there are 6 different categories, and they involve things like untimely death due to stroke, heart disease, homicide, suicide, extended hospitalizations for things like asthma and other medical issues, incarceration of a resident in the community, foreclosures, food insecurity, housing insecurity, things like that. And these things, what they share in common, like other forms of trauma, is that they are unexpected and uncontrollable and overwhelming. That's a definition of trauma. And when that affects a whole community, any one of those is bad. But when you get a bunch of them together, it can create a downward spiral. So even if you yourself don't have those specific things, just by virtue of living in a community that have had those problems, it can be harder to get community supports. Ossining, in my sense, is a highly resilient community. And what NYU has done, and this is what I'd love to do as government, and I would, if you're interested, you can demand, I'm a government bureaucrat, so you can demand that we do something. We have a geo-mapping department. And in New York City, what they've done is they have taken community loss index scores for different community tracts, and they show it to local communities. And they have the residents of that community, particularly parents, come up with a response. So they have NYU has a program called Mobilizing the Adult Protective Shield, or MAPS. And it's participatory research. It's a partnership with government. We can give you the data. You can tell us what needs to be done to make it a better community. And then your taxes pay my salary. So we can, maybe we can do something together. And I think when I read this, I was thinking of Ossining, because I get the sense that you guys are really on the leading edge of really coming together and being resilient and working as a grassroots coalition.
Ossining does have a lot of social service agencies that are born out of our community and that work very well together. So I'm glad that you recognize that about. Don't stick it back in the thing; you'll never get it back out again. Who had another question? There was one over here. Yes.
I just am curious about, and not that you wrote this form, but the question regarding mother or stepmother and, you know, abusive behavior towards that person. I guess what kind of piqued my interest was the part ever threatened with a gun by a woman. I can kind of understand not, you know, the physical being beaten or hit or struck because there may be a difference in strength there, but anyone can hold a gun or a knife. And I just think it's a curious, I'm just curious.
As a man, I'm glad you're bringing that up. And people lately have been bringing that issue up. And I think that's a valid point.
There was another?
Oh, you have the mic, please.
I just want to know, is ICE being implemented locally and at schools if a child has problems with their parents? How do they get to go to a place that they feel safe enough to ask for help? Because I know children that they're suffering with their parents, but they don't go to anyone. So it's how does the school know that this particular child or children have these problems? And also, I used to be a domestic violence counselor, and I know a lot of women that don't want to go to the police station because at the police they tell you, oh, he just pushed you. Oh, he just didn't give you any money because they always have excuses for the perpetrator. So I know a lot of women that needs this help. So where is ACE being implemented, or how do we go to help these people? Like, where do we send them? Who is offering these services for the community? Thank you.
Sure. As far as what's happening at the school and when children are experiencing difficulties at home or going through traumas, it will often come out in forms of behavior, absences, their academics, and that's when teachers are really the front line of what's happening in the classroom and seeing the child's behavior and what's going on. And they collaborate with guidance counselors, social workers, school psychologists, and then we meet with the students and we assess the students. And that could take some time as well, depending upon what has been going on in the child's life. From there, then we make recommendations, contact the family, and it can get tricky because some families are more open to receiving services and going by the recommendations that we give, some are not. And then that's really where the roles of the social workers, psychologists, guidance counselors, and keeping up with the student and making sure that they're receiving help that they need, and that if they are in danger, then we have to take other steps as well. Obviously, if the student is in danger, the police have to be called or CPS has to be called. That's done immediately. But it's really working with the families as well. We do work with the families, and the families, from the work that I've been doing here, they have been open, and they do want help for their kids, and that's where we make the connections for them. And following up with the students, even if the student is receiving services outside of the school, we always follow up and keep tabs on the student. So it's really just like a team effort that happens within the school system, and how the student is going through things, and it comes out, and then we help them out.
And also the Open Door has a very active behavioral health department, and that's co-located in there. And we have all of our social workers are bilingual. We just hired a new child psychiatrist. We have a lot of sort of robust infrastructure to help with mental health, because the movement now is that it's health. It's not mental health and physical health. It's health. And without mental health, you don't have health.
I'm sorry, Ms. Freed.
Just a minute. Did you, somebody, Ms. Luzango?
Oh, I just
yes.
also wanted to comment that as of probably within a couple of weeks, Andrus, which is a social service agency in the county, will have satellite mental health clinics in each of our 6 school buildings. And those, again, folks like Brenda, who are working with our students, will be able to refer students to Andrus if they need long-term, really therapeutic services that are beyond the purview of school counselors or school psychologists or social workers. And they're accepting a wide range of insurance and also have a sliding scale. So we're very fortunate, in addition to having the Open Door in our buildings for physical health in our buildings, we're going to have mental health clinics as well. And we thank Andy for assisting in getting all those approved.
I'll take credit.
While we're passing the microphone, just wanted to mention that we expect the Ossining schools will become more proactive and responsive in this area. As of next week, a new committee will be meeting to talk about social emotional learning. Alice Joslo and myself are on the committee, and we hope that perhaps students will be surveyed, perhaps the Miss Kendra curriculum would be implemented, that teachers would be better trained to recognize and intervene.
That's very exciting news, yes.
So, I'm sorry. I noticed that the movie came out in 2016, kind of middle of the year, and I think there's been a few changes in government since that time. Yeah. And I was wondering, first of all, is our current administration at all supportive of ACEs as a concept and the science involved with that? And I guess the second question is it possible that Kendra's rules could be read in Congress?
What's the last bit about Kendra?
Oh. No, I was wondering because Kendra's rules might be read in Congress.
I love that. You know, I think about Mr. Rogers. He went to Congress and he did something very similar. And yes, there are 40 pieces of legislation nationally that include the ACEs science. The state of Washington, for example, has done a full-out population-level study of ACEs. And what they do is they look at ACE prevalence rates, and that determines what services are going to be needed 20 years from now. And they've done this amazing data-driven analysis of the cost-benefit ratio of different evidence-based practices. And so they can really show that the return on investment by prevention especially is huge. It ranges between 7 and 13% per year in terms of recouping taxpayer dollars and just people's wellness. So yes, it is being taken very seriously. And I think our local county administration is actually very sympathetic and compatible with this. And they do talk about wellness, and they do talk about resilience. So it makes me very optimistic.
Yes, hi everyone. I am a local Ossining resident, and I also work with a company that does biofeedback. And I would be very happy to get your contact information because we are working on a youth stress management initiative, which we're going to be funding by the sale of a book that we have out by the person in charge called What Stress Can Do. And I'm very excited. I missed the last time when they were going to show this, and I said I have to come tonight. But it's I would love to get your contact information, and if we can, work together to do things to make this happen. We want to be able to help people from a young age and let them know that they have the power to work on managing their stress and even stress prevention. And it starts, the youth, if it starts with the youth, it can, the problem can be passed on.
May I have your attention, please? The library will be closing in a half hour. Please note that the computers will be shutting down in about 15 minutes. Please save all your work.
Will do. Okay, this is near and dear to my heart because I'll tell you, I think one thing that's really missing in our continuum of mental health services is a mind-body focus. And all of this talk about trauma and resilience, there are neural systems that are built in, and you can activate them.
Right.
And this actually ties into the question over here about what happens when people don't seek help. There are a lot of people, they don't want to go and seek help. And one of the problems with trauma is it's often interpersonal. And what causes adversity to be traumatizing is when there's a lack of interpersonal, interactive repair. And so the person that you might go to feel better might be the very person who's causing the trauma.
That's what I was
and traumatized people don't like going to talk therapy a lot of times because they tell their story and they get activated and it's arousing and they feel worse and they say, I'm never doing that again. So a trauma-informed principle is really starting with just being aware of one's physiology and one's body, and just simply being aware, and I've had to learn this myself in my life, it's just learning how to breathe right.
Right, so we would like
And
to
it
have,
works.
we would like to have available in the community, the children can come and they know that they can, it's someplace near the school, and they can be hooked up and they can learn how to, you know, work on themselves, and you know, maybe they could tell their friends and stuff like that, and their parents would know where they are in the community, things like that. If, you know, it starts with seeds, and then the crop gets bigger and bigger until things that you thought never could happen start to blossom and spread to, you know, like from one community to another community. The person in charge, he was involved in a Yonkers school system project, and it was one of the vice principals, I believe, whose child had taken advantage of it, and then the whole school got into it, and then when 9/11 took place, the funding was cut. But you know, we're in Ossining, and we would like to get something started, and whoever we can work with, we would be happy to work with you and have you work with us. You know, it's a matter of just finding out who's doing what and who can get together. It's exciting to me too.
And that just, it really does go such a long way. With the Youth to Youth Club that I run at the high school, and I have one running at the middle school as well, one of the things that we like to do, and really it's being driven, like these students come up with ideas and I just help guide what they're doing. And we focus several times a year on stress management. Like we're giving out these stress balls next week that say Our Brains Matter. CTC gave us the grant money. We were able to get all these stress balls. But even so, just in the work with the students that I do, sometimes we just sit there and I do breathing with them. Right. Sometimes I sit there and they're just coloring or drawing, and we're not talking because, as you had said, sometimes they don't want to talk about anything, and I don't want them leaving my office and going into a classroom and having all these thoughts running through their head, and just how far, you know, that takes them, just being able to sit and breathe, or use these techniques walking through the building, or sitting in the classroom where students don't really see what they're doing. And I would love to be able to connect and be able to bring this further into the Ossining schools, because I've seen like what it does to the students, and just the things that we give out to the students. They really are open to it, and they want to hear about it, and they want to take the information that we have. So I think that would be a wonderful connection.
Thank you. There was a question over here.
On an aggregate basis over the next, say, 10 or 15 years, do we predict that there's going to be more traumatized people, or that the levels of toxic stress will be increased? And in which case, what will that landscape look like?
Well, it depends on what we do now.
If Trump is reelected.
I can only pass along one little blurb that I read it in an article that it was today or yesterday, just saying that it seems as if there are more traumatized children and adults than in previous times. But as for why the author thought that, I can't verify.
I can make something up. I can make something up. I may be older, but social media, there's a lot of research out there that, I mean, at a very basic physiological level, when we have face-to-face contact with people, and there's a back and forth and a rhythm and a pattern to conversations, and feeling safe, and getting all these signals, and when we're doing things that are creative and expressive and embodied, and we're getting signals from our bodies, that's what builds resilience. And I have to say, from what I've read and heard about, that a lot of social media hijacks that process. It's junk food. It's social emotional junk food. Yeah. Younger people disagree with me, and they just say I'm old. But I think I'm right, because I'm old.
There's science.
Thank you.
No, I was just going to say there's science to that. No, there's science to back that. That's just not an opinion. There's science that
that says that, you know, this whole generation, you know, since the introduction of the cell phone, there's a whole generation of kids where they've seen the rates of depression, anxiety, suicide skyrocket. And so, for me, I think, because I work with a lot of high school and college students who are just really suffering under the weight of anxiety. And so for me, I think the question is, you know, what's an acceptable level of stress that we are putting on our students and our kids? And so, you know, and that was one of the things I wanted to bring up. You know, can you have toxic stress without the adverse childhood experiences? Or,
yes. Yeah, I think, and again, I think what study after study has shown is it's the lack of the interactive repair. When somebody gets put into a primitive survival state of hyper-arousal, fight-flight, or hypo-arousal, where they shut down, it's the lack of that repair to bring somebody back, and that's what's toxic. And so I think, you know, it may be that you don't have to have a huge adversity, but if you don't have that to bring you back, that I think can have the same kind of impact. And there are all sorts of small little stressors that are subliminal that have been shown to kindle this stress response system. I think specifically about institutional racism, microaggressions, micro-discriminations, micro-invalidations over and over and over again. And those things build and they kindle and they can have a toxic effect, especially in a society where a lot of people don't think race is a problem. And so how are you going to get that interactive repair if half the people, or a lot of people, don't deny its existence? So, yeah, it's complicated.
We probably have time for about 2 more questions. So if you were thinking you wanted to ask it, but you were waiting to be one of the last, now would be your chance. Okay, then I'll turn.
If anyone is interested, I actually have.
You know what would be really helpful, and this was for you and anybody else who mentioned some resources. We always have a Take Action Now that you can take with you that are resources that we are prepared to share with you at the end. But then we also have this this board right here, and I see that at least one item has been written on there. If you would write a resource, whether it's the name of a local organization or a website or a book or something that you think anybody who's interested in this topic would like to follow up on as we continue, because the point of these screenings is not just to have a conversation for 2 hours and then go home and forget that we had a conversation. It's to learn something and then do something. We'll share these resources through the god-awful social media, and then you can, and we'll put it in our emails as well, so that you can follow up and continue to grow with from where you are today. If there's no more questions, I'm going to turn it back to our panelists, because I'm sure that you have some final thoughts or items that haven't been raised tonight, either going back to the film or through your experience, that you'd like to leave us with. Something that could inspire us to do more once we leave this room, or that could perhaps be reassuring to us. It's very nice to hear your assessment of our community. Andrew, you're the one panelist who actually doesn't either live or work here in Ossining, so it's lovely that you have the perception of us that you do, and it's completely accurate. But clearly, there are so many different organizations and people in our community and surrounding communities that are here tonight that there's certainly a desire to take this to the next level. I'm delighted to hear that the school district has created the committee that they have, and I look forward to seeing how that can really further the value that has, the community value that has really brought us here this evening. So with that, I'm going to stop talking and ask our panelists, please share with us your final thoughts on this topic for us tonight.
I just want to thank you folks for showing up. I got asked to be part of this 6 months ago, and was really enthusiastic regarding how our community wants to respond. And there seemed to be a little bit of a dip, but now I sense the activism starting again. And we all make a difference. You can make a difference individually, but join a team and we can have even more impact. Right. It's just great to see you folks here tonight. You're interested, you want to get involved, and the time will come. If not now, later, then we'll ask you to join us in our efforts.
I just want to thank you all as well for being here. And I know on this topic of trauma, there is just a lot of negativity and just the dark side, quote unquote, of what's happening with students when they're experiencing trauma. On the other side, I am so fortunate to be able to work with so many students that have experienced a lot of adversity, and I get to see them come out on the end with support. The support is so important for them. Just having that one adult in their life to support them, whether or not it's family. But I get to see them get through school, continue on after school. I get to see them enjoy these moments, while they're in high school, middle school as well. And they just have this certain strength about them as well that they take with them. And that is there. In spite of a lot of things that many of them are experiencing, especially what has been happening with deportation, and that is something that I have been working with the students. But they are really finding their voice and finding their strength, and with support that they have around them, they are succeeding and they are moving forward. And if they're stuck, and we're helping them move forward. So there is that side of it too that I just want to leave this presentation with as well.
I can never have a final thought. As soon as I drive home, I'll say, oh, I wanted to talk about this. But I just want to thank all of you. What I really enjoy is I always learn something, and I thought this was a great conversation. And I am impressed by all of you coming out in the middle of the week, late at night, to watch this movie and have this conversation. And just to put it in perspective, Washington State, as Laura Porter in the movie said, they had community conversations for 10 years before they, and out of those conversations, wise actions were invented. And every locality is going to have their own wise actions to invent. So I think the fact that we're having these is really exciting, and I'm honored to be part of that conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to all of our panelists.
Hey, Victoria.
Oh, yes, sir.
I have one last question.
Oh?
I noticed people on the way into the theater, a couple people became friends of the series. Is it okay for people to become a friend of the series on the way back out?
I'm so glad you asked. Yes, there's that beautiful box decorated with curly ribbons and butterflies, and there's little handmade reusable paper envelopes, reused paper envelopes, where you can write your name and your email address, and a donation, suggested donation is $20, and then you'll get to see your name up in lights, just like those generous people. We hope you'll come back and join us on November 15th for Plastic Paradise. Thank you very much for being with us this evening.
I want to